This episode was recorded in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, so the 9th of June. This may contain triggering or sensitive content, so viewer discretion is advised. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Teenaging Podcast. My name is Nikki and I'm joined today by
Rihanna
and
Sarah.
Okay, so as you guys know, this is probably not going to be our usual humorous episode that is very casual. We're going to be talking about more about the Black Lives Matter movement, our political stance, and our support for everything. So yeah, just be prepared. So how did you guys find out about this first? Because obviously we're not in America, and we wouldn't be able to find out in first. And I don't think news media was the one that reported it first, right? So how did you guys find out?
Well, I know for me, Twitter is like a huge news source nowadays for this generation. So when I first went on Twitter, my whole timeline was just flooded with George Floyd and the whole incident. Um, a lot of tweets saying how this is another form of police brutality towards Black people, and then the Black movement protests all started, and the action towards police brutality. So yeah, a lot of my I first found out through Twitter, basically.
Yeah, I think same for me. I found out through Instagram. And you know what? Social media has played such a large role because I don't think I would have found out if it wasn't for like social media. And weirdly enough, I found out through the Instagram chains. I mean, like I know a lot of people got a lot of hate for doing that, but that's how I found out. So I think that was quite
Yeah.
useful. I don't know. What about you, Sarah?
I found out, I think I saw it on somebody's story, not the Instagram chain, but somebody posted like an artwork of George Floyd, and I was just curious who it was. And I, went on like the hashtag and I found out what happened. So, yeah, that's how I found out about everything. And I
Mm.
get, people are talking about how it's like a wake up call for, especially America right now, but at least how I see it is that this has happened so many times before in America. I think now more than ever, there's like a peak in social media and how it can really influence how people see things. Like for you guys, I know that you guys found out, and for us all together, we all found out through social media. So now people are getting informed and stuff like that. So more people are, hearing about what happens and the police brutality and the racial bias towards certain races when it comes to incriminating people. So now more than ever, people are standing up and seeing that George Floyd wasn't the only one, and there were so many more. And now all these stories are kind of being exposed for the first time to mass media, because I saw a post recently where it showed the difference between a certain news broadcaster in comparison to the real video of what was going on during the riots. And at first, you only, like on the news broadcast, you only see the riots like getting really crazy and people going like going out of mayhem. And then if you actually look at the full video, police officers start to almost ride over these protesters and put them in harm's way. So I guess for all of us, like as teens, we found out through social media. And as Nikki said, you have all these people saying like, these Black Lives Matter chains, they like, they have no purpose. I think some people have good intent. There are definitely people who are only doing it as an aesthetic, which is just inhumane in every way. But like for a lot of us, this was how we found out.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Especially with your first point about how this has happened so many times in the past. I think I saw a post today of a little girl holding a sign. I think I posted my story or something, but she posted it and she said how this has been happening for so long, but we just put it on snooze, and this is a time. And George Floyd is one example of how we have finally woken up to everything.
Exactly.
Like Black Lives Matter has been around since 2013, and it's only gained a lot of traction. I think the most traction, I would say, this year, because of that incident. It
Yeah.
upstarted, kind of,
Mhm.
ignited that movement. And I think it's really important. It's thanks to the power of retweeting and reposting or whatever as well. And I think now people are more infuriated than ever, because this is like an institutional racism that has not changed for a long time. Like, it's not like, obviously we've made strides. Like, I do acknowledge that we've made lots of progress into feeding this issue, but there's still policies and in the legal system and rules, even like representation in politics, that struggle to address this issue. And we just, yeah, like it's been happening for so long, and this is the time that we finally woken up to things, like, and I'm glad, because yeah, it's just been dragging on for way too long. With I would say it's gotten a lot of support, obviously, but this is the first time it's peaked,
Yeah.
um so much since like Martin Luther King
Mhm.
era, I guess.
I think like the biggest like letdown is that we know that so many uprisings similar to this have happened in the past, and people have fought for this for generations. Like, you're looking back at like the American Civil War, when people
Mm,
were fighting for their right to have freedom. And to think that like Black people still struggle with the issues that they're like they're generations ago, like people were fighting for them. Their great grandmothers were fighting for this, and it's still a problem that they have to deal with. It's because it's so embedded into their system, especially down in the South. It's very hard to fight for justice if you're not on the police's side. The police have so much protection over there. It's almost that they're immune to repercussions to what they do.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. That's why I think social media has such a good part of it, because half the videos I have seen gone viral and being shared around has not been once shared on the news or any media outlets. You know, you see videos on Twitter and Instagram of police literally throwing tear gas and shooting rubber bullets at innocent protesters who are just there to fight for equality and justice. And from these videos, you can really see from like the protester's point of view what it's like for your beliefs and your thoughts, opinions, everything to just be thrown away in a matter of seconds, only because you're a different skin color or you have different opinions. Actually, one of our good friends, Tanisha, who helped us start this podcast, she's the person who started it, made the logos, everything. She's a good friend of ours. She actually attended the protests in Sydney, and we just wanted to get her insight on it.
Okay, just some discussion beforehand. I was only there in the last 20 minutes, so I don't have like a full understanding of what happened. But yeah, what was the Sydney protest like? From what I experienced and what I saw, it was really peaceful, and people were maintaining social distancing to limit the spread of the coronavirus, which was very, I guess, helpful to the situation. And people, yeah, they were all just very peaceful, and I didn't see any aggressive behavior, any confrontations or anything like that. It was just people listening and allowing others for their voices to be heard, and just fighting on behalf. They were just uniting together to become this one great voice that's fighting for this movement. Okay, so this is the question: how did it contribute to the solution? From what I know, since it was just one protest, it hasn't completely fully resolved anything, but it has created awareness for the issue, as it was broadcasted all over Australian news, and it has made the issue very aware to the Australian government, and it shows that people have there are many people who are demanding change, and that this hits home for a lot of people, and a lot of people, like, just the Australian society, the fact that they're coming together to fight for this means that it's a major problem that does need to be fixed. Since it was just one individual protest, from what I've read, there hasn't been any investigation so far into David Dungay's murder or any of the other issues that were risen at the protest, but issues that were talked about at the protest, but I think it has kind of initiated it and brought light to the situation, which will propel investigations and hopefully a change in the system. Brief on how the Black Lives Matter movement has also reflected Australia's own systematic racism. I think that when George Floyd's death and the protests started becoming international news and like globally known, and discussions about systematic racism and the Black Lives Matter movement in general started like becoming more common, and like it was being talked through social media and just conversations in real life and news, I think people started saying oh, I'm so glad we don't have that in Australia. And that actually was the very trigger, I'd say, that made a lot of people realize that, like other people who would debunk that, and made people realize that no, we have that exact same issue here. We may not have as high a number of African Australians as America does have African Americans, but we do have Indigenous people. Not to say that African Australians in Australia don't face that, in which they very much do because they are Black, but Indigenous people such as Aboriginals or Torres Strait Islanders face that exact same issue within Australia. For example, David Dungay and so many other names like that I can't even list off because there's so many. And that just goes to show that that exact same issue is very prevalent here, even though we don't realize it, because in the same way that it's not portrayed in American media that of like the racism, of the injustice towards Black people, it's the exact same situation here in Australia, where these innocent people are not being represented and are being murdered and aren't having justice served because of the color of their skin. I feel like a lot of Aboriginal people brought light to the situation. And the way I personally found out was thing that made me realize that this is an issue in Australia too was through Instagram posts and things like that by I guess you could say they were just general social media pages, and they just talked about and raised awareness that, hey, this isn't just an issue in America. While you're fighting for the human beings over there, you need to fight for the human beings on the very soil you're like standing on, you live on, and that's not even your soil. It's actually their soil. This is their land that was stolen by white people. And the way I found out was one of my school's groups, Interact, they posted about it and brought lots of awareness to it, and it made me realize, yeah.
Wow, thank you so much, Tanisha. That was very well said. It's really amazing to see this perspective of someone who actually went to the protest. I'm sure it's amazing. I'm gonna say that I really do agree with everything you said. I feel like for a while now, Australia has lived in their own bubble, and we're always comparing ourselves to America in a sense where we say, oh, at least we're not as bad as America, at least we're not as uncivilized as America. But in reality, when you look at the statistics, when you look at the facts, when you look at the timelines, you realize that Australia is just as bad as America. We still have racial inequality with the indigenous people. And when you look at the timeline, it's only been, 12 years since our Prime Minister at the time has apologized to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders for taking their land. So when you see these protests happen in your own country, such as Australia, where we live, it really opens your eyes, and you see that Indigenous people are still facing so much racism and inequality every day. And it is never recognized because Australia only really focuses on how we're not as bad as America. When you take America out of the picture, you can see how cruel we have been to the Indigenous people.
I think because people are not seeing a direct, like, at least like in social media, people are like looking at what's going on in America and they're like, oh, they don't see a direct link to that in Australia. So they're like, oh, so we're fine. We don't have any of that. But if you even like go on Google and search up like 2 seconds, like just search up like statistics and how many people are put in prison and like what the ratio is for races, right? And like a simple thing is that Aboriginals actually only make up 3% of our population in Australia, yet they are 29% of the entire like population in all of our prisons, like nationally.
For sure. And similar to the George Floyd incident, an Aboriginal prisoner named David Dungai actually died in the same way as George Floyd. He was taking too long to finish his meal, so 5 police guards tackled him down and kneeled on his neck and basically choked him to death. And he also repeated the same words 12 times, "I can't breathe." And it's crazy to think that the same event basically happened in Australia, but no light was shed on it. And it's obviously to do with, Australia's pride and comparison to America, but it's time to, snap out of that perspective and realize and open our eyes and realize that Indigenous people are still facing racism every day in Australia, and it's time to make a change. So it's really good to see protests happen in Australia for not only Black people living in Australia, but also Indigenous people living in Australia, because they are the ones who found this land and deserve the same equal rights as every other person living in Australia. And I think it's times like these that are important in our history to remind ourselves that just because we're considered young or teenagers, it doesn't mean that we don't have a voice and we can't help in any way. There are still thousands of ways to help and spread awareness on this really important cause. Just by reposting any posts you see, signing petitions that you come across, finding any ways to donate, even just educating yourself on the situation can help immensely. Having conversations with your friends, family to further understand, be a part of any organizations, anything. We all have a voice and it's time to use it. Black lives matter and they will always matter. And with all that being said, I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode, learned some new things. You are aware of what's going on now if you weren't already. Just remember to follow our Instagram page at The Teenaging Podcast, our Twitter at The Teenaging Pod, our Facebook, The Teenaging Podcast. We now have a TikTok, so if you guys want to follow that, we're going to start releasing content soon. That is also The Teenaging Podcast. Make sure if you guys have any feedback or topics you want us to discuss, we have an anonymous page also called The Teenaging Podcast. We really hope you enjoy this episode. We'll see you next time. Bye.